The telegraph slip was a brittle, yellowed square in Samuel Vance's calloused hand, the black letters stark against the paper. Mother gone, stop, come home. Just 5 words to erase 8 years of distance. He'd left Redemption Creek, Nevada, with nothing but a saddle and a temper, vowing to make a name for himself that wasn't tied to his father's failed silver claim. He'd become a decent cowhand, drifting from one dusty outfit to another across the territory, but the name he'd made was just that, a name, spoken around campfires and forgotten by morning. Now, the only person who remembered the boy before the man was gone. The ride home was long and silent, the familiar alkali flats and sagebrush-choked hills doing little to soothe the hollow ache in his chest. He'd pictured the ranch as he'd last seen it, a place of quiet decline, his mother a stubborn shadow moving through rooms that held too many memories. He expected dust-filmed windows and a yard surrendering to weeds. He expected silence. He was wrong. As he crested the final rise, the sight of the homestead stopped his horse dead. The clapboard house, which should have been peeling, wore a fresh coat of whitewash that gleamed in the harsh afternoon sun. The vegetable garden to the side wasn't just surviving the summer heat, it was thriving, a riot of green against the parched brown earth. The corral fence was mended with new-looking timber, and inside it, his mother's 2 old mares, Daisy and June, looked sleeker and better fed than he'd ever seen them. Samuel dismounted, his boots sinking into soil that felt strangely soft, not the packed, cracked earth of his memory. A low hum of activity hung in the air, a sense of life that felt profoundly out of place. He walked toward the barn, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol out of pure, unthinking habit. The barn door was open. From within came the soft, rhythmic scrape of a currycomb against hide. He stepped through the wide opening, letting his eyes adjust to the dim, hay-scented air. A woman stood with her back to him, working on Daisy's flank. She was small of stature, her movements economical and sure. She wore a high-collared, long-sleeved dress of worn, grey fabric that fit her neatly. It was a style he'd seen on the Chinese women who lived near the railroad camps, but never here, not in Redemption Creek, and certainly not in his mother's barn. Her black hair was coiled in a severe knot at the nape of her neck. The horse, Daisy, saw him first. Her ears swiveled, and she shifted her weight with a low snort. The woman stilled instantly, her hand freezing on the mare's back. She didn't startle or cry out. She simply turned her head, her whole body remaining poised, ready. Her face was young, younger than he'd expected, with high cheekbones and dark, intelligent eyes that held no welcome. They assessed him with a swift, unsettling calm, taking in his trail-dusted clothes, his weathered face, and the hand that still lingered near his gun. "Who are you?" Samuel's voice was rough from disuse. The woman said nothing. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable. She took a half-step back, placing the body of the horse between them. It was a clear, defensive posture. "This is the Vance homestead," he said, trying to gentle his tone. "I'm Samuel Vance. Mary Vance was my mother." At the mention of his mother's name, a flicker of something passed through her eyes, not recognition, exactly, but a change in the quality of her stillness. She gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not invitation. She still didn't speak. He wondered if she even understood him. The silence stretched, filled only by the buzzing of flies and the soft stamp of a hoof. This was his home, yet he felt like an intruder. The woman in the strange grey dress held the space with a quiet authority that his mother's letters had never once hinted at. He did not yet know that the woman's silence was not a barrier, but a shield, and what it protected would unravel everything he thought he knew about his mother's final years. The funeral was a spare affair, held in the small clapboard church where Samuel had squirmed through sermons as a boy. The townspeople offered their condolences, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and a hard, frontier curiosity. They looked him over, sizing up the man who had stayed away for so long. After the final prayer, as folks milled about in the churchyard, Bartholomew Cromwell approached him. Cromwell owned the town's only hotel and held the deeds to half the businesses on Main Street. He was a man who dressed in Eastern suits that looked out of place in the Nevada dust, his face clean-shaven and his manner always smooth. "Samuel," Cromwell began, his voice a low, sympathetic purr. A terrible loss. Your mother was a pillar of this community. She was a good woman, Samuel said, the words feeling thin and inadequate. Indeed. Which is why we must discuss the matter of her estate with some delicacy. Cromwell placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. I know this is a difficult time, but business, as they say, waits for no man. The ranch, it has some outstanding obligations. To me, as it happens. Samuel's gaze hardened. My mother never mentioned any debts. Mary was a proud woman, Cromwell said, his smile never reaching his eyes. She fell on hard times. I was happy to help, of course. But the note is past due. He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. And then there's the matter of the occupant. The Chinese girl. An unfortunate complication. The way he said girl made Samuel's teeth ache. She was there when I arrived. Seems to be taking care of the place. A squatter, Cromwell corrected smoothly. Taking advantage of a lonely old woman's charity. It's a sad thing to see. I'd be willing to take the land off your hands, clear the debt, and handle the unpleasantness of her removal myself. For a fair price, of course. Out of respect for Mary. The offer hung in the air, slick and convenient. It was a clean break. He could settle his mother's affairs, take what little money was left, and ride away from Redemption Creek forever. But the image of the young woman in the barn rose in his mind, her steady hands, her watchful eyes, the way the horse trusted her. His mother had trusted her, too. He was sure of it. The ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Cromwell, Samuel said, his voice flat. I'll be looking into my mother's affairs myself. Cromwell's smile tightened at the edges. A sentimental decision, Samuel. And likely a foolish one. Check the records at the county clerk's office. You'll find my claim is quite secure. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Samuel standing alone in the cemetery dust, the weight of a fight he didn't understand settling upon him. He returned to the ranch to find the woman, whose name he still did not know, pulling weeds in the garden with fierce, methodical concentration. He approached slowly, not wanting to spook her. I need to know your name, he said, standing at the edge of the tilled rows. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. She hesitated, then spoke a single, soft word. Leanne. It was the first time he'd heard her voice. It was lower than he'd expected, and clear. Leanne, he repeated. I'm Sam. She gave another one of her short, sharp nods. He felt a sudden, sharp frustration at the wall between them. He needed answers, and she was the only one who had them. He gestured toward the house, then back at the garden, a questioning look on his face. How? Why? Leanne watched him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his. Then, she wiped her soil-stained hands on a rag tucked into her waist, rose to her feet, and walked past him toward the house. She moved with a purpose that told him to follow. He trailed her into the small, clean kitchen. The room smelled of dried herbs and soap, his mother's smell. It was almost exactly as he remembered it, except for a neat stack of books on the small kitchen table. One was a well-worn English dictionary. Leanne went to a small wooden box on the mantelpiece, his mother's sewing box. She opened it and took out not needles and thread, but a small, folded bundle of letters tied with a piece of twine. She held them out to him. His name, Samuel, was written on the top envelope in his mother's familiar, spidery handwriting. What he found inside that box would not only give him the answers he sought but would also reveal a debt of honor deeper than any note held by Bartholomew Cromwell. He took the letters to the porch, the wood groaning under his weight as he sat on the top step. The sun was beginning to dip below the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Leanne stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel, as he untied the twine. The first letter was dated nearly 2 years prior. My dearest Samuel. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally come home. There is so much I should have told you. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old woman her pride. His breath caught in his throat. He read on, his mother's voice rising from the pages, telling a story of loneliness, hardship, and unexpected grace. She wrote of how the ranch had become too much for her, how the isolation was a heavier burden than the work. She wrote of the railroad bringing in crews of Chinese laborers, and the open hostility they faced in town. And then she wrote about Leanne. Her name is Leanne. Her husband, Wei, was a good man, a hard worker on the grade. There was an accident. A rock slide. The company gave her a pittance and told her to move on. She had nowhere to go, Samuel. She was a widow, same as me, just with more years ahead of her and less kindness behind her. I saw her in town, trying to buy food with what little coin she had, and saw the way Cromwell's men looked at her. I couldn't leave her to that. So I brought her home. The letter described how Leanne, grieving and terrified, had slowly brought the ranch back to life. She couldn't speak much English, and his mother knew no Chinese, but they had found a language in shared work. Leanne's knowledge of gardening was astonishing. She coaxed life from soil his mother had long given up on. She had a gentle hand with the horses, a patience his mother had lost. She was not a squatter. She was a partner. The last letter held the truth about Cromwell. I had to borrow money for seed and supplies last spring. The drought was hard. Mr. Cromwell was the only one willing to extend a loan. The terms were difficult. I fear I was foolish, Samuel. He was so polite, but his eyes were like a hawk's on a field mouse. He wants this land. Leanne knows it. She saw him out here, measuring the property line with his eyes, weeks before I fell ill. I was trying to pay it down, selling vegetables in town, but it was never enough. The debt is real. But the kindness I found with Leanne, that is real, too. Protect her. This home is hers as much as it is yours now. It is my final wish. Samuel folded the letter, the paper soft and worn from his mother's hands. He looked up at Leanne, who still stood in the doorway, her face cast in shadow. The wall between them was gone, replaced by a shared legacy. He finally understood. His mother hadn't been a victim. She had made a choice, a brave and compassionate one, in the face of her own decline. And Cromwell wasn't just a creditor, he was a vulture who had been waiting for her to die. He has a note, Samuel said, his voice quiet but clear. A debt against the ranch. Leanne's expression didn't change, but she nodded. She had known. She had stayed anyway. The next morning, Cromwell arrived in a smart-looking buggy, a sheaf of papers in his hand. He didn't bother to get down, just hailed Samuel from the driver's seat. Leanne came out of the house to stand on the porch, a few feet behind Samuel. I trust you've had time to consider my generous offer, Cromwell said, his tone pleasant. I have, Samuel replied, walking toward the buggy. And I've read my mother's papers. The ranch stays in the family. Cromwell's smile vanished. This isn't family, he sneered, gesturing with his head toward Leanne. This is a complication you can't afford. I have here a notice of foreclosure, filed and approved. You have 30 days to pay the note in full, principal and accumulated interest. $400. Or the property and all its assets become mine. $400. It might as well have been 4,000. Samuel had less than 50 to his name. The amount was staggering, clearly inflated by predatory interest. That's robbery, Samuel said, his hands clenching into fists. It's business, Cromwell corrected him. Your mother signed the agreement. It's all legal. I'd advise you not to make this difficult. He looked past Samuel to Leanne, his eyes lingering on her with an expression of cold ownership that made Samuel's blood run cold. After all, once the ranch is mine, I'll need someone to tend the garden. The threat was unmistakable. Cromwell wasn't just after the land. He was after everything on it. He flicked the reins and the buggy rolled away, leaving a cloud of dust and the suffocating weight of a 30-day deadline. Samuel turned and looked at Leanne. For the first time, he saw not just stillness in her eyes, but a flicker of fear. And beneath it, a resolve as hard as desert rock. He had a choice, to run from this fight as he had run from everything else, or to stand his ground and honor his mother's last wish. He looked from Leanne's determined face to the whitewashed house, the green garden, the peaceful horses. This was his mother's legacy. It was home. And he would not let it be stolen. The first week was a blur of frantic work and quiet desperation. Samuel rode into town and sent a telegraph to his last employer, asking for the back wages owed to him. The reply came 2 days later, a wire for $47. It was a pittance against the $400 they needed. The town banker, a man firmly in Cromwell's pocket, just laughed when Samuel asked for a loan. The debt was a cage, and Cromwell held the only key. But Leanne worked as if the deadline didn't exist. She rose before the sun, tending her garden, mending tack, and caring for the horses with a serene focus that shamed Samuel's restless anger. One evening, he found her in the barn, carefully measuring out oats. "It's no use," he said, the words tasting like ash. "We can't work our way out of this. There's not enough time." Leanne finished her task before turning to him. She walked over to a small crate where she kept her few possessions. From it, she pulled a small, embroidered silk pouch. She opened the drawstring and poured the contents into her palm. It was a pair of delicately worked jade earrings and a simple gold ring. Her wedding band. She held them out to him. "Sell," she said, the single word carrying the weight of a final, desperate sacrifice. Samuel looked at the jewelry in her hand, the last remnants of her past life, of her husband. He felt a profound sense of shame. He had been so focused on the money, on Cromwell's legal power, that he had missed the point. His mother hadn't saved Leanne with money. She had done it with shelter, with partnership. The answer wasn't in finding $400. The answer was in fighting with what they had. "No," he said, gently closing her fingers over the jewelry. "We don't sell this. We don't sell any part of what's yours." A new idea, born of his mother's letters, began to form in his mind. She had written that Leanne's husband, Way, had died in a rockslide on the railroad grade. She had also written that the company had given Leanne a pittance. That was the thread. The next day, he rode 20 miles to the nearest railroad depot, a bustling, chaotic place. He spent hours talking to foremen and clerks, asking questions about work crews from 2 years ago, about a man named Way, about a rockslide. He was met with shrugged shoulders and blank stares until an old Irish paymaster overheard him. "Way," the old man said, scratching his chin. "I remember him. Quiet man. Strong. The company called the slide an act of God. No liability. But it wasn't. It was blasting powder, poorly stored. The foreman cut corners to save a few dollars. We all knew it. Is there a record?" Samuel asked, his heart pounding. "The company buries its mistakes deep," the paymaster said. But the territorial marshal came out. Asked a lot of questions. There might be a report filed in Carson City. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. Carson City was a 3-day ride. He would lose precious time. But it was the only card he had left to play. When he returned to the ranch and told Leanne, she simply nodded, her eyes trusting him in a way that both fortified and terrified him. She packed him food for the journey, her movements efficient and sure. As he mounted his horse, she touched his arm. "Be careful," she whispered. 3 months later, the autumn sun cast a golden light across the valley. The garden had been harvested, its bounty filling the shelves of the root cellar. In the corral, 3 new foals stood on spindly legs beside their mothers. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, prosperous. Samuel Vance stood on the porch, watching Leanne humming softly as she braided Daisy's manet. The foreclosure notice was gone, burned to ash in the kitchen stove. The territorial marshal's report from Carson City had been exactly what the paymaster had hinted at, a scathing account of negligence on the part of the railroad's foreman. Faced with a federal inquiry and a lawsuit for wrongful death that Samuel threatened to file on Leanne's behalf, the railroad company had settled quickly and quietly. The settlement was more than enough to pay Cromwell's fraudulent debt, with plenty left over to buy seed for the next season and repair the barn roof. When Samuel had confronted Cromwell at his hotel with the bank draft and a copy of the marshal's report, the man's smooth composure had finally cracked. The town, which had once watched with detached curiosity, now saw Cromwell for what he was, a predator who had preyed on a grieving widow. His power, built on the perception of legitimacy, began to crumble. The days after were different. The work was still hard, but it was their own. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership that needed few words. They ate their meals together in the quiet kitchen, the silence comfortable now, not a barrier. He learned the story of her village from the few English words she knew and the expressive gestures of her hands. She learned about his years drifting, seeing in his eyes a loneliness that mirrored her own. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast, dark sky, he turned to her. "Leanne," he said. "This is your home. My mother made that clear. But I'd be honored if you'd let it be my home, too. With you." She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face in the twilight. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, a small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. She simply nodded. The following Sunday, they stood before the preacher in the same small church where his mother's funeral had been held. Leanne wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself. Samuel wore his only clean shirt. He placed his mother's thin gold wedding band on her finger. It was a perfect fit. The townspeople watched, their faces no longer holding judgment, but a quiet, hard-won respect. They were no longer just a cowboy and a Chinese widow. They were the Vances of Redemption Creek. Walking back to the ranch, hand in hand, Samuel realized he had come home seeking an ending, a way to close a chapter of his life. Instead, he had found a beginning. He understood now that a legacy wasn't something you inherited like land or money. It was something you chose to build, day by day, an act of kindness at a time. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.